Steel alone cannot win a war. Belief does. Armies collapse without conviction, but a single man, burning with purpose, can change the fate of empires. If you want others to die for your cause, it must first set their souls on fire. Speak not to their minds, but to their hunger, to be part of something eternal. Give them vision. Give them purpose. Give them a reason to say, if I fall, let it be for this. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind. And tell us, where are you watching from? You think you understand men? You think they move by reason, by careful calculation of profit and loss? Then you understand nothing of power, nothing of history, nothing of the fire that burns in the human heart. I have commanded armies, I have built an empire. And I tell you this, no man ever charged into cannon fire because of a logical argument. No soldier ever planted a flag on enemy soil because of a cost-benefit analysis. The greatest lie of our age is that humans are rational creatures. We are creatures of passion, of glory, of burning desire. When I stood before my armies, I did not give them statistics. I gave them destiny. I showed them visions of immortality. I painted pictures of their names echoing through centuries. You want to know why men followed me across the frozen wastes of Russia? Why they marched through desert heat and mountain snow? Because I understood the fundamental truth. The human spirit craves meaning more than comfort, glory more than gold. Look at any great movement in history. Was it built on spreadsheets and logical propositions? No, it was built on dreams, on visions, on the deep primal hunger for something greater than ourselves. This is why most leaders fail. They think they can move men with mere policy, with dry arguments about efficiency and progress. But policy doesn't stir the blood, logic doesn't make men sprint into bullet fire, reason doesn't build empires. You want to truly lead? Then understand this. Every human heart is a sleeping giant, waiting for the right call to awaken. We are all searching for something worth dying for, because that is what gives us something worth living for. I've seen it in their eyes, that moment when a soldier transforms from a man following orders into a true believer. It's not gradual. It's instant, like a spark igniting gunpowder. One moment they are thinking beings, weighing options. The next, they are creatures of pure conviction, ready to storm heaven itself if I gave the command. This is the first lesson of true leadership. Forget everything you've been taught about rational persuasion. If you want to move men's hearts, you must speak to their souls. You must tap into those ancient primal forces that lie dormant in every human breast, the hunger for glory, the desire for immortality, the yearning to be part of something greater than themselves. Remember this, men will die for a flag but never for a flowchart. They will sacrifice everything for honor, but nothing for a percentage point. If you want to build something that lasts beyond your mortal span, if you want to create a cause that men will gladly give their lives for, then you must first understand this essential truth. The rational man is a myth. We are creatures of passion, of belief, of burning conviction. Embrace this truth, and you hold the key to moving mountains. Deny it, and you will spend your life wondering why your perfectly logical plans never ignite. The world. Now let us speak of how to forge these raw emotions into unbreakable loyalty, for that is where true power begins. Look at your hand. What do you see? Flesh and bone? No. You're looking at the most sophisticated weapon ever created. But a hand without a sword is just a hand. A man without a flag is just a man. But give that man a symbol. Give him colors to defend, and watch how he transforms into something extraordinary. When I marched into Italy, I didn't just bring an army. I brought eagles, golden eagles, mounted atop our standards, gleaming in the sun. These weren't mere decorations. They were the soul of France given physical form. Every soldier who marched beneath them knew they carried 200 years of glory on their shoulders. Here's what most don't understand about symbols. They are not just pretty designs. They are bridges between the mundane and the eternal. When my soldiers looked up at those eagles, they didn't see metal worked by craftsmen. They saw immortality. They saw their chance to become part of something that would outlive their flesh. I've watched it happen countless times. A new recruit joins the ranks, young, uncertain, thinking only of his next meal or his warm bed back home. Then he sees the flag catch the morning light. He hears the stories of those who carried it before him. He learns the price paid in blood to keep it from touching the ground. And slowly, something changes in his eyes. This is crucial. Your symbol must be simple. Enough to draw in the dirt with a stick, yet profound enough to write epic poems about. The eagle, the cross, the crescent moon, these endure because they speak to something deeper than reason. They bypass the mind and strike directly at the heart. But here is where most leaders fail. They create empty symbols, pretty flags with no blood in them, clean banners that have never seen battle. Your symbols must be baptized in struggle, in sacrifice, in shared pain and triumph. Every flag worth dying for is stained with the stories of those who died for it before. I'll tell you a secret of how to forge such power. Create ceremonies. When we presented new eagles to a regiment, it wasn't a simple distribution of equipment. It was a sacred rite. Veterans would weep. Young soldiers would tremble. Because they understood this wasn't about receiving a standard. It was about becoming part of an immortal line. Your symbol must promise something beyond victory. It must promise transformation. When my soldiers carried the eagle, they weren't just fighting for France. They were becoming France. The symbol elevated them beyond their mortal limits. It turned farm boys into legends, peasants into immortals. Consider this. Why did my old guard fight to the last man at Waterloo? Their emperor had fallen. Victory was impossible. Yet they formed their squares and died under their eagles, because by then it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about being worthy of the symbol they served. This is how you build something men will die for. Give them a flag that doesn't just represent victory, but represents their highest selves. Let them look upon your symbol and see not what they are, but what they could become. Make it sacred, not through decree, but through the blood and devotion of those who bore it before. Remember, men don't die for cloth and metal. They die for what that cloth and metal have come to mean. They die for the stories woven into every fiber, for the glory bound up in every fold. Your task is not just to create a symbol, but to breathe such power into it that men will count themselves blessed to bleed in its shadow. Your flag must become their North Star, their measuring stick for honor, their passport to immortality. When they look upon it, they should see not just a banner, but a bridge to something greater than themselves. Only then will you have created something worth dying for. Now, watch closely, for I will show you how to take this symbol and weave it into something even more powerful, a cause that transcends the individual and touches the divine. Listen carefully, for I am about to share with you the most vital secret of leadership. No one dies for a man. They die for what that man represents. Even at the height of my power, when soldiers screamed, "Vive l'Empereur," as they charged into battle, it wasn't me they were dying for. It was the dream I embodied. You see, I understood something that most leaders never grasp. The moment your cause becomes about you, your glory, your wealth, your power, you have already begun to lose. Men might follow a charismatic leader out of admiration, but they will only sacrifice everything for something that dwarfs any single individual. When I spoke to my armies, I never said, "Win this battle for Napoleon." I spoke of France, of destiny, of the great march of history. I showed them how their smallest actions were connected to forces that would echo through centuries. Every soldier, from the highest marshal to the lowest drummer boy, understood that they were part of something vaster than themselves. Here's what most people don't understand about true devotion. Humans are desperate to lose themselves in something greater. We all know we are mortal, limited, flawed. But give someone a chance to merge with something eternal, and watch how eagerly they shed their individual concerns. I made France more than a country. I made it an idea, a destiny, a light that would illuminate the world. When my soldiers marched into battle, they weren't just fighting for territory, they were carrying the torch of civilization itself. Every step they took was a step into history. But remember this, your cause must be both grand enough to inspire awe and immediate enough to demand action. When I spoke of building a new Europe, I didn't just paint pictures of a distant future. I showed my men how each battle, each sacrifice, each moment of courage was laying another stone in that magnificent edifice. The greatest error a leader can make is to think small. If you offer people nothing but personal gain, they will desert you the moment the costs outweigh the benefits. But if you can show them how their actions are connected to something timeless and transcendent, they will endure any hardship, face any foe. I'll tell you something I observed in countless battles. Men don't fight hardest when they're thinking about their own lives. They fight hardest when they believe they're protecting something sacred, something that will outlive them. The soldier who thinks only of himself may run. The soldier who thinks of history will stand his ground. This is why you must learn to speak in centuries, not in days. When I addressed my armies before battle, I didn't just talk about the enemy in front of them. I spoke of how future generations would remember this day, how their grandchildren would speak of what they did here, how they were standing at a pivot point of history. But here is the crucial point. This cannot be mere rhetoric. You must believe it first with every fiber of your being. The cause must consume you before it can consume others. When I spoke of destiny, of glory, of the great mission of France, every soldier could see in my eyes that I believed it to the depths of my soul. Your cause must be like a cathedral, so vast that no single lifetime could complete it, yet so compelling that men will gladly spend their lives laying its foundations. It must offer not just victory, but meaning, not just success, but significance. Think carefully about this. What is your cause? Is it worthy of a man's life, his death, his eternal devotion? If you cannot answer yes without hesitation, then you must dig deeper, think bigger, reach higher, for only a cause that touches the infinite can command infinite loyalty. Remember, the size of your success will be determined by the size of your vision. Small dreams create followers, grand visions create zealots. And in the end, it is not the pragmatists who change the world. It is the zealots, the true believers, those who see in your cause something worth more than their own lives. Now, let us discuss how to transform these inspired followers into something even more powerful. True believers who will move mountains at your command. There is a moment I have witnessed 1,000 times on 1,000 different faces. It is the moment when a man stops following orders and starts following destiny. When discipline transforms into devotion, when duty becomes desire. This is the alchemical moment that turns lead into gold, followers into believers. But let me ask you this. Do you know the difference between a follower and a believer? A follower needs constant direction. A believer needs only opportunity. A follower stops when you stop watching. A believer continues even when you're gone because the fire you lit inside them burns independent of your presence. I will tell you something that may surprise you. The best soldiers in my army were not the ones who were best at following orders. They were the ones who understood deep in their bones why those orders mattered. They were the ones who had internalized the vision so completely that they could act on their own initiative, knowing their actions would align with the greater purpose. Here is the first key to creating believers. You must show them the invisible. When my armies marched into battle, they weren't just seeing the enemy before them. They were seeing the future we were building, the legacy we were creating, the destiny we were fulfilling. Every mundane action was wrapped in layers of meaning. Most leaders make this critical mistake. They think belief comes from grand speeches alone. But true belief is built in layers, like sediment forming rock. It comes from consistent messages, from small moments, from daily reinforcement of the greater truth. Every interaction, every decision, every consequence must point to the same ultimate vision. Let me share with you a method I used. I would take a simple military maneuver, a standard formation change, for instance, and infuse it with deeper significance. This wasn't just about moving troops efficiently. This was about demonstrating the precision and unity that would reshape Europe. Every drill became a micro-scale version of our grand mission. But here's what most people don't understand. About creating belief, it must be tested to be strengthened. When my soldiers faced hardship, I didn't shield them from it. I showed them how their suffering was meaningful, how their struggles were forging them into the men worthy of our cause. Every obstacle became an opportunity to prove their faith. You must understand this crucial truth. Belief, once ignited, feeds on action. The more a man acts in accordance with a belief, the stronger that belief becomes. This is why I always ensured that my soldiers' actions, even small ones, aligned with our greater purpose. Every step reinforced their conviction. Watch carefully. Now, for this is important, the transformation from follower to believer happens in the gap between command and action. When a man does something not because he must, but because he cannot imagine doing otherwise, that is the moment of conversion. Your task is to create more of these moments. I will tell you something about human nature. We all hunger for certainty in an uncertain world. When you can offer someone unshakable conviction, when you can show them their place in a grand design, you give them something more valuable than gold or power. You give them purpose. Here is another secret. Believers create believers. When a man truly believes, it shows in his eyes, in his voice, in his bearing. He becomes a walking testament to the cause. I didn't have to convince every soldier personally. Those who truly believed did it for me, spreading the fire of conviction through the ranks. But remember this warning: false belief is worse than no belief at all. You cannot fake this transformation. You cannot manufacture it through tricks or temporary enthusiasm. The vision you offer must be real enough and grand enough to sustain lifelong devotion. The ultimate test of your success is this: what do your people do when no one is watching? Do they take shortcuts? Do they compromise the mission? Or do they uphold its principles even at personal cost because they've internalized them so deeply that doing otherwise would be unthinkable? This is how you build an unstoppable force. Not through fear, not through discipline alone, but through unshakable belief. When every member of your cause carries the vision inside them, when they see themselves as agents of destiny rather than mere followers of orders, you have created something that no external force can defeat. Now, let us explore how shared hardship can forge these believers into something even stronger, a brotherhood bound by more than just belief. Listen well, for I am about to tell you something that the weak will never understand. Comfort breeds complacency. Ease breeds weakness. But suffering is the forge that turns men into steel and strangers into brothers. I have seen it countless times. Two men who would never share a word in peaceful times will share their last crust of bread after a forced march through Russian snow. Nobles and peasants who would never meet eyes in Paris would die for each other after sharing the trenches of battle. This is no accident. This is the ancient alchemy of shared pain. Here's what most people don't understand about hardship. It strips away everything false. In comfort, men can maintain their pretenses, their social masks, their petty differences. But when the cold bites deep, when the hunger gnaws, when the enemy's cannons roar, all that falls away. What remains is raw, real, and unbreakable. I will tell you a secret from my campaigns. Sometimes I would deliberately make things harder than they needed to be. Not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. When my armies had to cross the Alps, we could have taken the easier passes. But I chose the difficult paths, because I knew that on the other side, I would have not just an army, but a brotherhood. Consider this truth. Men don't bond over victories. They bond over shared struggles. The easy triumph is celebrated and forgotten. But the brutal march, the desperate battle, the seemingly impossible challenge, these burn themselves into the soul. These create bonds that last beyond the grave. But here is the crucial point that most leaders miss. The suffering must have meaning. Random hardship breeds resentment. Purposeful hardship breeds strength. Every difficult mile, every hungry night, every painful challenge must be tied to the greater cause. Your people must understand why they suffer. I'll share with you a technique I used. When my armies faced hardship, I would suffer with them. If they marched, I marched. If they ate hard bread, I ate hard bread. If they slept on frozen ground, so did I, not just for show, though the example matters, but because shared suffering creates authentic bonds that no amount of comfortable camaraderie can match. Watch closely now, for this is important. The transformation happens in layers. First comes the physical challenge, the shared pain, exhaustion, hunger. Then comes the mental test, the doubt, the fear, the temptation to quit. But finally, gloriously, comes the spiritual forging, the moment when men realize they can endure more than they ever imagined possible. Here's another truth they won't teach you in comfortable academies. The strongest loyalty is born in moments, when men have every reason to break but choose to hold, when they could flee but stand firm, when they could save themselves but risk everything for their brothers instead. I have seen men who hated each other become willing to die for each other. After one night of holding the line together against impossible odds, I have watched lifelong bonds form in the space of hours when men face death, shoulder to shoulder. This is the power of purposeful suffering, but remember this warning: the suffering must be shared. If your people bear hardship while you enjoy comfort, you breed not loyalty but contempt. True brotherhood is forged in the fire of shared experience. You must be willing to endure what they endure, to bleed as they bleed. Here is the deepest secret of all. Men will forget what you said. They will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel about themselves. When they survive what they thought would break them, when they stand firm when they thought they would fall, they are transformed, and they never forget who stood beside them in that moment of transformation. This is how you build unbreakable loyalty, not through rewards, not through punishment, but through shared crucibles that prove both the strength of your people and the truth of your cause. Every scar becomes a badge of honor. Every hardship overcome becomes a story of triumph. The brotherhood forged in suffering has another powerful effect. It creates its own gravity. Those who haven't shared the crucible can sense it. They see the bonds between your people, the unspoken understanding, the absolute trust, and they hunger for it, even knowing the price. Now, let us explore how to take this forged brotherhood and give it voice. How to speak with the kind of fire that turns conviction into unstoppable action. Words, everyone has words. Politicians have words. Merchants have words. But words alone are nothing but breath given shape. I am going to teach you how to speak in fire, how to forge language into something that burns in the mind and brands itself on the soul. Let me tell you about the morning before Austerlitz. The sun was rising through the mist, and I stood before my army. In that moment, I didn't give them a speech. I gave them their place in history. I didn't talk about tactics. I showed them their immortality. When I finished, men were weeping, yet their spines were steel. They would have charged into hell itself. Here's what most don't understand about powerful speech. It's not about volume. It's not about clever phrases. It's about absolute conviction transmitted directly into other men's hearts. When I spoke to my armies, they didn't just hear my words, they felt my certainty in their bones. I will share with you the first secret of speaking with fire. You must believe with such intensity that doubt itself burns away. If there is even a shadow of uncertainty in your heart, it will seep into your voice. Your words must come not from your mouth, but from the deepest core of your being. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. When you speak to men about destiny, your eyes must see it. When you talk of victory, your body must already feel its certainty. When you describe the future you will build together, it must be more real to you than the ground you stand upon. Most leaders make this fatal mistake. They try to convince with logic when they should be converting with fire. Logic makes men think. Fire makes men act. Logic speaks to the mind, which can always find objections. Fire speaks to the soul, which hungers for purpose. Let me teach you another secret, the power of the pause. When I spoke to my armies, I would sometimes stop mid-sentence. In that silence, you could hear hearts beating. Every man would lean forward, desperate for the next word. That tension, that anticipation, that is where the real power lies. Here's what most people don't understand about inspiration. It's not about making people feel good. It's about making them feel powerful. When I spoke to my soldiers, I didn't promise them comfort. I promised them greatness. I showed them the giants they could become. Consider this technique I used. I would start with the present reality, stark and challenging. Then, piece by piece, I would build the vision of what could be. By the time I described our ultimate victory, they could taste it. The gap between what was and what could be created an irresistible tension that demanded action. But remember this, your words must be matched by your presence. When I spoke of courage, I stood as if bullets could not touch me. When I spoke of destiny, my certainty filled the air like thunder before a storm. Your body, your voice, your eyes, everything must transmit the same burning conviction. Here is another vital truth. The most powerful words are the ones that echo what your people already feel in their hearts but haven't dared to believe. You must articulate their deepest hopes, their highest aspirations. When you give voice to these unspoken dreams, you become more than a leader. You become a prophet of their own potential. I will tell you something about human nature. Every heart contains a sleeping fire. Your words must be the spark that awakens it. When I spoke to my men before battle, I wasn't giving them courage. I was showing them the courage they already had. This is the deepest secret of speaking with fire. You must make your cause so real, so vital, so absolutely necessary that inaction becomes impossible. Your words should create a world in which men cannot imagine doing anything but following you into the flames. But here is the warning. Fire without direction is just destruction. Your burning words must always point toward the goal, the mission, the destiny you have promised. Every phrase should forge another link in the chain that binds your people to their highest purpose. Learn this final truth about speaking with fire. The most powerful words are not the ones shouted in moments of triumph, but the ones whispered in moments of doubt. When all seems lost, when hope seems foolish, when reality seems to mock your dreams, that is when your burning conviction must shine brightest. Now let us explore how to take this fire and forge it into something even more powerful. The rituals and myths that turn a movement into a religion of purpose. Listen to me now, for I am about to reveal something that the cynics and rationalists will never understand. Humans are not merely creatures of reason. We are creatures of ritual, storytellers by nature, seekers of meaning in every shadow. Master this truth, and you will master the art of building movements that outlast empires. I remember the day we crowned me emperor in Notre Dame. The ceremony lasted hours. Every gesture, every movement, every word was choreographed with precise meaning. The cynics called it theater, but I knew better. I knew that what we were creating that day was not just spectacle, but sacred memory, a story that would burn itself into the mind of France. Here's what most people don't understand about ritual. It's not about the actions themselves, it's about transformation. When a common soldier received his eagle standard, when he swore his oath beneath it, he wasn't just going through motions. He was becoming something new. The ritual marked his passage from ordinary man to guardian of France's glory. Let me share with you the first secret of creating powerful rituals. They must cost something. Free membership breeds cheap loyalty. When my officers earned their marshal's baton, they paid for it in blood and years of service. The ritual of promotion wasn't just ceremony, it was recognition of sacrifice already made. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. Every great movement needs its own calendar, its own sacred days, its own ceremonies that mark the rhythm of belonging. When I created the Legion of Honor, I didn't just create awards. I created moments of transformation, regularly spaced ceremonies where valor was recognized and loyalty was renewed. But here is where most leaders fail. They create empty rituals, hollow ceremonies that touch only the surface. True rituals must reach into the soul. When my veterans told stories of battles to new recruits, it wasn't mere entertainment. It was the passing of sacred fire, the building of a mythology that gave meaning to every hardship. I will tell you something about human nature. We hunger for stories that explain our place in the universe. The greatest empires understood this. They didn't just conquer, they created myths. They turned battles into legends, soldiers into heroes, causes into crusades. Consider this technique I used. Every victory, every significant moment was immediately transformed into story. But not just any story, a story that proved our destiny, that showed the hand of fate itself, favoring our cause. The sun breaking through the clouds at Austerlitz became the Son of Austerlitz, a symbol that would stir hearts for generations. Here's another secret, the power of repeated phrases, of words that become incantations. Glory wasn't just a word in my army, it was a spell that could transform fear into courage. France wasn't just a country, it was a prayer that could turn peasants into heroes. Every movement needs its own sacred language, but remember, this warning, your myths must have roots in truth. You cannot manufacture legend from nothing. The story must arise from real deeds, real sacrifices, real triumphs. The art lies not in creating fiction, but in revealing the deeper meaning behind what actually happened. This is what separates mere organizations from movements that shake the world, the ability to create meaning from experience. Every setback, every victory, every sacrifice must be woven into the greater story. Nothing can be meaningless. Everything must serve the myth. Here is another vital truth. Rituals create brotherhood. When men share the same ceremonies, speak the same sacred words, participate in the same transformative moments, they become bound by something stronger than blood. This is how you turn a collection of individuals into a unified force. Watch how this works. A new recruit joins your cause. At first, he's an outsider, but through ritual, through ceremony, through shared stories and sacred moments, he begins to transform. The myth enters his blood, the cause becomes his identity, the movement becomes his family. Remember this, the most powerful rituals are the ones that happen naturally, that arise from the life of your movement. The way veterans welcome new recruits, the songs sung after victory, the quiet ceremonies of remembrance. These organic rituals often carry more power than any you could design. This is how you build something that outlasts you. Create rituals that transform, myths that inspire, meanings that transcend the ordinary. When your people move through their days, surrounded by sacred purpose, when every action is infused with significance, when every moment is part of a greater story, then you have created something eternal. Now, let us discuss how to take this mythic power and use it to eliminate all possibility of retreat, how to burn the bridges that would allow doubt to creep back in. There is a moment in every great endeavor when retreat becomes more dangerous than advance. I learned this lesson not in military academies, but on battlefields where victory and annihilation stood as the only options. Let me tell you about commitment. That leaves no path backward, only forward or death. When I crossed into Italy with my army, The first thing I did was eliminate our supply lines. The comfortable generals called it madness. But I understood something they did not. An army, with a safe retreat, will always be tempted to use it. Cut off that retreat, and even cowards fight like lions. Here's what most people don't understand about total commitment. It's not about bravery. It's about necessity. When my soldiers stood with the Alps at their backs and enemy armies before them, courage became irrelevant. They fought because they had to, and in that necessity, they discovered strengths they never knew they possessed. Let me share with you the first principle of burning bridges. It must be done publicly, irrevocably, with no possibility of reversal. When I had my ships burned after landing in Egypt, it wasn't done in secret. Every man watched the flames. Every man understood the message. We would either conquer this land or be buried in it. But here is where most leaders fail. They create soft commitments, leaving little escape hatches, small ways out. They think they're being prudent, realistic. What they're really doing is breeding doubt. Doubt is a luxury that great achievements cannot afford. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The burning of bridges must be more than physical. It must be psychological, emotional, spiritual. When my officers received their marshal's batons, they weren't just accepting a promotion. They were severing their connection to their old lives. There could be no return to mediocrity. I will tell you something about human nature. We are capable of extraordinary things when extraordinary things become our only option. I've seen ordinary men perform impossible feats, not because they suddenly became heroes, but because they suddenly had no choice. Consider this technique I used. Before major campaigns, I would have my officers publicly pledge their fortunes, their honor, and their lives to our cause, not because I needed their wealth or their oaths, but because public commitment burns bridges more surely than fire ever could. Here's another secret. The most powerful bridge-burning moments are the ones that transform identity itself. When my soldiers took their eagle standards, they weren't just accepting a military responsibility. They were becoming different men. Their old selves were burned away as surely as any retreat path. But remember this warning: the burning of bridges must be matched by the clarity of purpose. Men will accept having no way back only if the way forward is crystal clear. You must show them a future worth the sacrifice of all alternatives. This is what separates true commitment from mere dedication. Dedication preserves the possibility of withdrawal. Commitment burns that possibility to ash. When my old guard stood at Waterloo, they didn't need inspiration. They needed only to be worthy of what they had already become. Here is another vital truth. The act of burning bridges creates its own momentum. Once men know they cannot retreat, they stop looking backward. All their energy, all their creativity, all their determination focuses on the path ahead. This is how impossible victories become possible. Watch how this works in the mind. When retreat is possible, every hardship raises the question, should we turn back? But when retreat is impossible, that same hardship provokes a different question. How do we overcome this? The difference between these questions is the difference between defeat and victory. I will share with you the deepest secret of bridge burning. It is not about destroying options. It is about creating such powerful forward momentum that backward movement becomes unthinkable. When my armies marched into Russia, it wasn't the winter that kept them moving forward. It was the knowledge that they had become men who could not turn back. Remember this: the strongest bridges to burn are not physical, but psychological. The soldier who has publicly proclaimed his dedication, who has accepted honors and responsibilities, who has become known as a man of absolute commitment, he has burned bridges that no river could wash away. This is how you create unstoppables, momentum. Make retreat unthinkable. Make forward movement the only honorable path. When your people know that glory or death are the only options, they will astonish you with their capacity for glory. Now let us explore how to take this absolute commitment, and forge it into something even more powerful, a culture where honor becomes the very air your people breathe. Let me tell you about a force more powerful than gunpowder, more binding than chains, more precious than gold. I speak of honor, not the weak thing that passes for honor in drawing rooms and diplomatic circles, but the fierce, burning honor that makes men choose death over disgrace. When I created the Legion of Honor, fools thought I was just making another medal system. They didn't understand. I wasn't creating decorations. I was creating a new aristocracy of merit, a brotherhood where honor wasn't inherited with blood, but earned through action. This changed everything. Here's what most people don't understand about honor. It's not about rules or codes written on paper. It's about identity. When my soldiers said, "I am a member of the old guard," they weren't describing their position. They were declaring who they were at the deepest level. And that identity came with obligations that no order could match. Let me share with you the first principle of creating a culture of honor. It must be earned, never given. When my officers received their marshal's batons, they didn't just receive authority. They received the weight of having to be worthy of that authority every single day. The higher the honor, the heavier the burden. But watch carefully now, for this is where most leaders fail. They try to impose honor from above, through regulations and punishments. True honor cannot be commanded. It must be cultivated. It grows from the bottom up, through shared standards, through daily choices, through the silent judgments of peers. I will tell you something about human nature. Men will break rules when they think they can avoid detection, but they will die to maintain an identity they fought to earn. This is why I never relied solely on discipline. I built a culture where every soldier knew that his honor was his most precious possession. Consider this technique I used. Every regiment had its own traditions, its own standards, its own special marks of distinction. But these weren't just decorative differences. They were different flavors of honor, different ways of being worthy. A man of the Imperial Guard didn't just act differently from other soldiers, he was different. Here's another secret. Honor must be visible, but not cheap. The medals I created weren't just bits of metal. They were public symbols of proven worth. Every soldier who saw a comrade wearing the Legion of Honor knew exactly what that man had done to earn it. The symbol carried the weight of real achievement. This is crucial. In a true culture of honor, shame becomes more feared than death. I've seen soldiers charge into cannon fire without hesitation, not because they were brave, but because they couldn't bear the shame of being seen as cowards by their brothers. But remember this warning: honor must be maintained through constant renewal. It's not enough to earn it once. It must be proven again and again. This is why I always made sure there were new challenges, new opportunities for my men to demonstrate their worth. Watch how this works in practice. A new recruit joins a regiment of proven honor. At first, he's nothing, but he sees how the veterans carry themselves, how they speak, how they act. He sees the respect they've earned, the pride they take in their identity, and slowly he begins to change himself to match that standard. Here is another vital truth. Honor creates its own discipline. When my officers lived by a code of honor, I didn't need to watch their every move. They held themselves to standards higher than any I could impose. They policed themselves more strictly than any external authority could manage. The deepest secret of honor is this: it must cost something. The higher the price, the more men will value it. When my soldiers knew that their honor had been bought with blood and sacrifice, they guarded it with their lives. They wouldn't let a moment's weakness destroy what they had paid so dearly to earn. Remember this: honor is contagious. When men of high honor set the standard, others rise to meet it. I've seen entire units transform because a few honored veterans showed them a different way to live. This is how you build excellence, not through orders, but through example. This is what separates mere organizations from legendary brotherhoods. In an organization, honor is a rule to follow. In a brotherhood, honor is the air men breathe. It becomes so natural, so essential, that dishonorable action becomes literally unthinkable. Now, let us explore how to take this culture of honor and forge it into something even more powerful, a system where discipline itself becomes not a burden, but a gift that men crave. Let me tell you about a transformation I witnessed thousands of times, the moment when a man stops seeing discipline as a chain that binds him and begins to understand it as the fire that forges him. This is the secret that turns ordinary men into unconquerable forces. When I took command of the army of Italy, I found troops in disarray, proud of their freedom from rigid discipline. Within months, these same men were begging for higher standards, stricter training, more demanding expectations. Why? Because I showed them what true discipline could make them become. Here's what most people don't understand about discipline. It's not about control. It's about capacity. When my Imperial Guard maintained their immaculate standards, even in the midst of battle, it wasn't because they feared punishment. It was because they had discovered that discipline was their edge, their secret weapon, their path to greatness. Let me share with you the first principle of making men love discipline. Never present it as a limitation. Present it as a source of power. When my artillery crews drilled until they could load and fire with mechanical precision, they weren't practicing obligation. They were mastering sorcery. Each perfectly disciplined motion brought them closer to becoming unstoppable. But here is where most leaders fail. They impose discipline through fear, through punishment, through external force. True discipline cannot be imposed. It must be ignited. It must come from a burning desire to achieve standards so high that only the most rigorous discipline can reach them. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The transformation begins when men see the results of discipline in others. When my young recruits saw the old guard move as one perfect machine, saw their unshakable calm under fire, saw their absolute mastery of themselves and their craft, that's when they began to hunger for discipline themselves. I will tell you something about human nature. We all desire mastery. We all want to be capable of extraordinary things. Show a man how discipline can take him beyond his natural limits, and he will embrace it with passion. The strict routines of my artillery units weren't endured. They were celebrated. Consider this technique I used. Every new standard of discipline came with new privileges, new responsibilities, new marks of distinction. The most disciplined units got the hardest missions, the greatest challenges, the highest honors. We made discipline the gateway to glory. Here's another secret. Discipline must be visible in everything. The way a man stands, the way he maintains, his equipment, the way he speaks, every detail matters. Not because small things are important in themselves, but because mastery of small things proves control of oneself. But remember this warning. Discipline without purpose becomes mere rigidity. Every standard, every rule, every practice must visibly connect to greater effectiveness, greater capability, greater achievement. My soldiers polished their boots to mirror shine, not because it mattered in battle, but because it proved their attention to detail in everything. This is what separates mere obedience from true discipline. Obedience is doing what you're told. Discipline is becoming what you aspire to be. When my officers maintained their composure under fire, it wasn't because they were following orders, it was because they had become men incapable of losing control. Here is another vital truth. The highest discipline comes from pride, not fear. When my units competed to maintain the highest standards, it wasn't because they feared inspection. It was because they took fierce pride in being the best, and they knew that only perfect discipline could maintain that position. Watch how this works. A new recruit arrives, chafing at the rules, but he sees how the veterans carry themselves, sees their quiet confidence, their absolute mastery of themselves and their duties. He begins to understand that discipline isn't limiting them, it's elevating them. And slowly, his resistance turns to hunger. The deepest secret of discipline is this. it must be harder than necessary. The standards must be higher than practical. Because discipline isn't about meeting requirements, it's about transcending normal human limitations. When my guard trained beyond the point of perfection, they weren't preparing for battle. They were preparing to be legendary. Remember this. True discipline becomes a source of pride, a mark of identity, a proof of worth. When your people begin competing to maintain higher standards, when they start holding themselves to stricter disciplines than you require, when they begin teaching and enforcing these standards among themselves, then you have created something extraordinary. Now, let us explore how to take this disciplined force and give it the final crucial element, leadership that inspires not through command, but through example. Let me tell you about leadership that cannot be questioned, cannot be resisted, cannot be denied. I speak not of authority granted by rank or title, but of authority seized through action. When I rode my white horse into the thick of battle, I wasn't just risking my life, I was demonstrating an undeniable truth. Where I dared to go, my men could follow. At the bridge of Arcole, my soldiers hesitated before the Austrian fire. No amount of shouting or commanding could move them forward. So I seized a flag, stepped into the storm of bullets, and showed them the way. They didn't follow my orders, they followed my example. This is the difference between commanding and leading. Here's what most people don't understand about true leadership. It cannot be delegated. It cannot be practiced from the rear. It must be demonstrated, proven, lived with every action. When my marshals led charges, slept on frozen ground, shared their soldiers' hardships, they weren't just being brave, they were being necessary. Let me share with you the first principle of leading from the front. You must be visible, not just in moments of triumph, but in moments of crisis. When my army faced disaster in Egypt, I didn't hide in my tent studying maps. I walked among the plague-stricken soldiers, touching them, showing them that their emperors shared their risks. But here is where most leaders fail. They think leadership is about giving orders, making decisions, directing others. These are mere management. True leadership is about embodiment, becoming the living proof that what you ask is possible. When I demanded endurance from my army, I first demonstrated that endurance myself. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The leader must be first in danger, first in hardship, first in sacrifice. Not because these things are good in themselves, but because they answer the eternal human question. Why should I follow you? When your people see you take the risk you ask of them, that question answers itself. I will tell you something about human nature. We follow what we admire, and we admire what we see. The general who stays behind the lines may be obeyed, but he will never be followed with passion. The leader who shares the worst moments, who proves his courage again and again, he creates loyalty beyond reason. Consider this technique I used. Before asking anything extraordinary from my men, I would first do it myself. Before a difficult march, I would walk the first leagues on foot. Before a dangerous assault, I would personally reconnoiter the ground. This wasn't bravado, it was necessity. Each action said, "This can be done because I am doing it." Here's another secret. The frontline leader learns things no report can tell him. When I rode among my soldiers, I wasn't just showing myself, I was learning their condition, their morale, their needs. This knowledge, gained through direct experience, was worth more than 1,000 dispatches. But remember this warning, leading from the front doesn't mean being reckless. It means taking calculated risks that serve a purpose. When I exposed myself to enemy fire, it wasn't from desire for glory. It was because at that moment, my example could turn defeat into victory. This is what separates mere authority from true leadership. Authority can command bodies, but leadership commands hearts. When my old guard saw me sharing their dangers, their hardships, their triumphs and defeats, they weren't following orders anymore. They were following faith made visible. Here is another vital truth. The leader who proves himself in small things earns the right to command in great ones. When my officers saw me checking sentry posts in the middle of the night, inspecting equipment personally, paying attention to the smallest details, they understood that my greater commands came from knowledge, not just rank. Watch how this works. A leader steps forward in a moment of crisis. He doesn't just point the way, he goes there first. Suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes achievable. What looked like certain death becomes a risk worth taking, because the men don't just hear go, they hear follow me. The deepest secret of leading from the front is this: it creates its own momentum. When your example becomes legendary, when stories of your actions spread through the ranks, you create a standard that others strive to meet. I've seen young officers perform incredible feats not because they were ordered to, but because they were trying to be worthy of their emperor's example. Remember this: the greatest leaders don't drive from behind, they pull from the front. They don't say go, they say come. They don't point at the obstacle, they charge it first. And in doing so, they make their leadership not a matter of rank or authority, but a matter of demonstrated, undeniable truth. Now, let us explore how to take this visible leadership and use it to transform the ultimate price, the sacrifice of life itself, into the ultimate triumph. Listen carefully, for I am about to tell you about the most sacred alchemy a leader can perform, the transformation of death into immortality. When my soldiers fell at Austerlitz, at Jena, at Wagram, they didn't die, they became legends. They became eternal. This is the deepest secret of leadership, not preventing sacrifice, but making it holy. I remember standing before my army after the Battle of Marengo, reading the names of the fallen. I didn't speak of their death. I spoke of their immortality. Each name wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Each sacrifice wasn't a loss, but a foundation stone in the cathedral of glory we were building together. Here's what most people don't understand about sacrifice. It's not about the dying. It's about what the dying makes possible. When a soldier of the old guard fell defending his eagle standard, his death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a testament. It showed everyone watching what our cause was worth, what our brotherhood would give. Let me share with you the first principle of hallowing sacrifice. It must be witnessed. When my veterans fell, I made sure their stories were told, their names remembered, their deeds celebrated, not in whispers of sadness, but in songs of triumph, because a sacrifice witnessed becomes a sacrifice sanctified. But here is where most leaders fail. They try to minimize sacrifice, to apologize for it, to hide it away. This dishonors both the dead and the living. When sacrifice is needed, it must be elevated. It must be given meaning so profound that it transforms death itself into a kind of victory. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The way you honor sacrifice shapes how future sacrifices will be viewed. When I awarded the Legion of Honor to the family of a fallen hero, I wasn't just commemorating a death. I was showing everyone that in our cause, even dying was a path to glory. I will tell you something about human nature. We don't fear death as much as we fear being forgotten. When my soldiers knew that their sacrifice would be remembered, celebrated, woven into the very fabric of our nation's story, it changed how they faced death. It wasn't an end anymore. It was a kind of beginning. Consider. This technique I used after every battle. I would gather my army to honor the fallen. But we didn't mourn. We celebrated. We recounted their acts of courage, spoke their names with pride, held them up as examples of what we could all aspire to be. Their death became instruction for the living. Here's another secret. Sacrifice must be made visible. The medals I created, the monuments I built, the ceremonies I instituted, these weren't just honors. They were reminders. Every soldier who saw the Legion of Honor knew it was bought with blood. Every recruit who heard our battle songs knew they were written in sacrifice. But remember this warning. Empty honors dishonor everyone. The celebration of sacrifice must be authentic, must be earned, must be backed by real meaning. When I spoke of a soldier's glorious death, Every word was true. He had died for something real, something worthy, something that would outlive us all. This is what separates mere casualties from sacred sacrifice. Casualties are numbers, sacrifices are stories. When my officers fell leading their men into battle, they didn't become statistics. They became legends. Their sacrifice wasn't measured in blood lost, but in inspiration gained. Here is another vital truth. The celebration of sacrifice creates its own cycle. When men see death met with honor, met with glory, met with eternal remembrance, it changes how they live. I've seen soldiers perform impossible feats not because they didn't fear death, but because they knew their death would mean something. Watch how this works. A soldier falls defending his position. In most armies, this would be a tragedy, a loss, a reason for sorrow. But in my army, his death became a rally cry. His sacrifice became a standard that others strove to live up to. His end became a beginning for countless others. The deepest secret of hallowing sacrifice is this: it must transcend death itself. When my soldiers knew that falling in battle meant joining the immortals, meant having their names spoken with reverence for generations, meant becoming part of something eternal, death lost its sting. It became merely a door to glory. Remember this: how you treat your fallen determines how your living will fight. When every sacrifice is celebrated, when every loss is transformed into legend, when dying for the cause is seen as a kind of triumph, then you have created something more powerful than any weapon. You have made death itself serve your purpose. Now let us explore how to take this sacred understanding of sacrifice and forge it into an unstoppable force, the absolute conviction that victory is not just possible, but inevitable. Let me tell you about a force more powerful than artillery, more decisive than numbers, more crucial than strategy. I speak of the absolute, unshakable certainty of victory. When my armies marched across Europe, they didn't hope to win. They knew they would win. This certainty itself became a weapon that no enemy could match. At Austerlitz, we were outnumbered. At Jena, we faced the legendary Prussian army. At Marengo, we were on the brink of defeat. Yet in each battle, my men fought with the calm certainty of those who had already glimpsed the future. They saw victory not as a possibility, but as an inevitability waiting to be claimed. Here's what most people don't understand about the will to win. It's not about motivation or courage or even determination. It's about certainty. When my guard entered battle, they weren't trying to win. They were simply executing a victory that, in their minds, had already happened. This is the state of mind that moves mountains. Let me share with you the first principle of creating the certainty. It must be built on foundation of proven capability. When my artillery crews knew they could load and fire faster than any enemy, when my cavalry knew they could charge more fearlessly, when my infantry knew they could maneuver more skillfully, their certainty of victory was built on solid ground. But here is where most leaders fail. They try to create confidence through words alone. True certainty cannot be spoken into existence. It must be forged through progressive victories, through demonstrated excellence, through countless small proofs that accumulate into unshakable faith. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The will to win must be cultivated in layers. First comes competence, the mastery of skills. Then comes confidence, the knowledge of capability. Finally comes certainty, the unshakable knowing that transcends mere confidence. I will tell you something about human nature. We perform at our peak not when we are desperate for victory, but when we are calmly certain of it. When my veterans went into battle, they weren't hoping, weren't striving, weren't even fighting. They were simply winning, because that's what they did. Consider this technique I used. Before every major battle, I would walk among my troops, not to give them courage, but to remind them of who they were. You are the conquerors of Italy, I would say. You are the heroes of Egypt. I wasn't building their confidence. I was reminding them of their proven identity. Here's another secret. Victory must become a habit. Every drill, every maneuver, every small engagement must reinforce the certainty of success. When my units trained, they didn't practice until they got it right. They practiced until they couldn't get it wrong. This created a bedrock of certainty that no circumstance could shake. But remember this warning: the will to win must be based on reality, not fantasy. My soldiers' certainty came from proven capability, from mastered skills, from demonstrated excellence. You cannot hypnotize men into believing they will win. You must build them into men who cannot imagine defeat. This is what separates mere determination from the true will to win. Determination is pushing through despite doubt. The will to win is advancing without doubt. When my old guard moved forward under fire, it wasn't because they were brave. It was because, in their minds, victory was the only possible outcome. Here is another vital truth. The will to win must be collective. One man's certainty can be shaken, but the shared certainty of a brotherhood becomes unbreakable. When every soldier in a unit knows that every other soldier shares his absolute conviction in victory, that conviction becomes self-reinforcing. Watch how this works. A new recruit joins a veteran unit. At first he has doubts, fears, uncertainties, but he's surrounded by men who radiate absolute certainty, who move with the calm assurance of inevitable victory. Slowly, that certainty infects him. His doubts fade, not because they're answered, but because they become impossible to maintain in the face of such collective conviction. The deepest secret of the will to win is this: it must become part of identity itself. When my soldiers said, "I am of the Imperial Guard," they weren't describing their unit. They were declaring their certainty of victory, because the Guard did not know how to lose, and they were of the Guard. Remember this: the ultimate will to win isn't loud, isn't desperate, isn't even particularly emotional. It's a quiet certainty, a calm knowing, an unshakable faith built on real capability and proven excellence. When your people move with this kind of certainty, they become unstoppable, not because they try harder, but because defeat becomes literally unthinkable. Now, let us explore how to take even apparent defeats and transform them into the raw material of future victories, how to turn setbacks into sacred stories that strengthen rather than weaken your cause. Listen well, for I am about to reveal the ultimate alchemy of leadership, how to transform defeat into legend, setback into strength, retreat into the prelude of greater victory. When my army withdrew from Moscow, it could have been our end. Instead, it became a testament to unbreakable will, a story that proved we could survive anything. Here's what most people don't understand about setbacks. They're not endings unless you let them be. When we lost Egypt, I didn't speak of defeat. I spoke of the legends born in the desert, the impossible victories, the courage that would live forever. The physical campaign ended, but the legend it created strengthened our cause for years to come. Let me share with you the first principle of transforming setbacks. The story matters more than the outcome. When my old guard made their final stand at Waterloo, the battle was lost, but the legend of their loyalty, their courage, their refusal to surrender, became a story that would inspire generations. They lost the field, but won immortality. But watch carefully now, for this is where most leaders fail. They try to hide their setbacks, to minimize them, to sweep them away. This is weakness disguised as strength. True power lies in seizing control of the narrative, in transforming the story of what happened into fuel for what comes next. I will tell you something about human nature. We draw more inspiration from those who face adversity with courage than from those who never face adversity at all. When my soldiers heard the stories of our hardships in Russia, not sugar-coated, but transformed into epic tales of endurance, it didn't weaken their resolve, it strengthened it. Consider this technique I used. After every setback, I would gather my officers not to mourn what was lost, but to forge the meaning of what happened. We didn't just discuss tactics and numbers. We shaped the story that would be told, the lessons that would be drawn, the inspiration that could be found in even the darkest moments. Here's another secret. Setbacks reveal truths that victory conceals. When my armies faced defeat, when they endured hardship, when they were tested beyond normal limits, these moments showed everyone what we were truly made of. These became the stories that proved our worth more than any easy triumph. But remember this warning: the transformation of setback into strength must be authentic. You cannot simply declare defeat to be victory. You must find the real steel in the struggle, the true glory in the resistance, the genuine triumph in the refusal to break. This is what separates mere spin from true narrative mastery. Spin tries to hide the truth. Mastery transforms the truth into something more powerful than any fiction. When I spoke of the retreat from Moscow, I didn't deny the hardship. I elevated it into proof of our unconquerable spirit. Here is another vital truth. Every great cause needs its trials. Without setbacks, without moments of adversity, your story has no depth, no weight, no proof of worth. The stories of how we overcame, how we endured, how we refused to break, these became more powerful than tales of easy victory. Watch how this works. A defeat occurs. In most causes, this would trigger doubt, recrimination, loss of faith. But when you've mastered the alchemy of narrative, that same event becomes proof of your people's courage, evidence of their dedication, testimony to their unbreakable spirit. The deepest secret of transforming setbacks is this: they must be faced head-on, embraced even, but always with an eye to their meaning. When my armies faced hardship, we didn't pretend it wasn't happening. We seized control of what it meant. Every step of retreat became a step of defiance. Every loss became proof of our willingness to sacrifice for our cause. I'll share with you another technique: the power of perspective. A battle lost today can become, in the longer story, the setup for a greater triumph tomorrow. A retreat can become, in the telling, not a movement backward, but a gathering of strength. The meaning of any event lies not in the moment, but in the narrative you build around it. Remember this: your cause will face setbacks. This is inevitable. What matters is not whether you fail, but how you transform that failure into fuel for future victory. When your people know that even defeat will be transformed into legend, that even retreat can become a story of courage, they become truly unconquerable. This is how you build something that cannot be broken by setback or defeat. You make every trial a testament, every hardship a proof of worth, every setback a story that strengthens rather than weakens your cause. You teach your people that it is not victory or defeat that matters most. It is how you transform whatever comes into proof of your greatness. Now, let us explore how to take this mastery of external narrative and turn it inward. How to build in your people an internal fortress that no outer circumstance can breach. Let me tell you about a fortress more impregnable than stone walls, more powerful than artillery, more valuable than all the gold in France. I speak of the fortress within, the citadel of the mind that, once built, can never be breached by external force. This is where unstoppable power truly begins. When I watched my old guard stand firm under fire, it wasn't their physical courage that made them legendary. It was something deeper, an internal architecture of steel and stone that no cannon could shake, no enemy could breach, no hardship could crumble. They had built within themselves a fortress of absolute conviction. Here's what most people don't understand about inner strength. It's not about being fearless. It's about building something inside yourself that is stronger than fear. When my veterans faced overwhelming odds, they weren't without fear. They had simply built something within themselves that fear could not touch. Let me share with you the first principle of building this inner fortress. It must be constructed, stone by stone, day by day, choice by choice. When I trained my soldiers, we didn't just drill their bodies, We forged their minds. Every decision to endure, every choice to persist, every moment of choosing duty over comfort laid another stone in their internal fortification. But here is where most leaders fail. They try to build inner strength through words alone, through motivation, through temporary inspiration. True inner fortitude cannot be given. It must be built. It comes from facing challenges that seem impossible, then proving them possible. It comes from meeting your limits, then surpassing them. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The building of the inner fortress happens in the small moments, not the large ones. It's not about grand gestures or heroic actions. It's about the daily choice to maintain standards when no one is watching. It's about the private victories that no one else sees. I will tell you something about human nature. We all have within us the materials to build something magnificent. But these materials must be shaped by challenge, tempered by adversity, forged by conscious choice. When my soldiers stood unshaken in the face of death, it wasn't because they were special. It was because they had built themselves into something special. Consider this technique I used before asking my men to face external enemies. I taught them to conquer internal ones. Fear, doubt, weakness, comfort, these were the first battles they had to win. Because once you've built a fortress within yourself, external challenges become merely opportunities to demonstrate its strength. Here's another secret. The inner fortress must be built on absolute truths, not hopes, not wishes, not maybes, but proven principles that have been tested and found unshakable. When my guard knew, not thought, not believed, but knew, that they were invincible in close combat, this became a cornerstone of their internal fortification. But remember this warning. The fortress must be built to withstand not just external assault, but internal weakness. The most dangerous enemies are not the ones who face you on the battlefield. They are the doubts, the fears, the compromises that arise within. Your inner fortress must be strong enough to defeat these too. This is what separates mere confidence from true inner strength. Confidence can be shaken by circumstances. The inner fortress remains standing no matter what storms rage around it. When my veterans faced defeat, faced hardship, faced impossible odds, their outer circumstances changed, but their inner fortress stood unshaken. Here is another vital truth. The inner fortress must be built on pride, not arrogance. Pride in standards maintained, in challenges met, in duties fulfilled. This is not the pride that comes before a fall. It is the pride that prevents the fall, because it would rather break than bend. Watch how this works. A soldier faces a moment of extreme pressure. Everything around him says to break, to run, to compromise. But he has built within himself something stronger than circumstance. His inner fortress has made him incapable of certain kinds of defeat, not because he cannot be defeated, but because he cannot choose defeat. The deepest secret of the inner fortress is this. Once built, it becomes not a prison that confines you, but a source of power that defines you. My soldiers didn't maintain their standards out of fear or obligation. They maintained them because that's who they had built themselves to be. Their inner fortress wasn't a set of rules they had to follow. It was a strength they could always draw upon. Remember this, the outer world will always be chaotic, always be challenging, always be threatening to overwhelm. Your task is not to control these external circumstances. It is to build within yourself and your people something that remains unshaken no matter what storms rage outside. Now, let us explore how to take this individual inner strength and amplify it through the deliberate creation of an environment that demands and rewards greatness. Let me tell you about a power more subtle than command, more pervasive than instruction, more transformative than direct order. I speak of the environment you create, the invisible force that shapes behavior, molds thought, and forges character, without a single word being spoken. This is how you truly control the mind. When I created the Imperial Guard, I didn't just establish standards, I created a world. Every detail, from the way they dressed to where they were quartered, from how others addressed them to how they carried themselves, shaped who they became. They lived in an environment where excellence wasn't encouraged, it was simply the air they breathed. Here's what most people don't understand about environmental control. It's not about rules or regulations, it's about creating a reality so complete, so immersive, that certain behaviors become natural while others become unthinkable. When my guard maintained their legendary discipline, it wasn't because they were following orders, it was because anything less had become impossible in their world. Let me share with you the first principle of environmental control. Everything speaks. The standards of dress, the precision of movement, the way space is organized, the rhythm of daily life. These aren't just details. They are the language that constantly tells your people who they are and what is expected of them. But here is where most leaders fail. They try to shape behavior through direct instruction while allowing their environment to contradict their message. This is like trying to build a fire while standing in the rain. The environment will always win. You must make every element of your people's world reinforce your intended message. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The environment must create pressure without force. When my officers lived in a world where every detail reflected excellence, where every interaction demanded precision, where every moment reinforced their elite status, they became excellent not because they were ordered to, but because anything else felt wrong. I will tell you something about human nature. We become what our environment demands of us. When I placed my best units in surroundings that radiated authority, that spoke of power, that demanded dignity, they naturally rose to inhabit these qualities. The environment shaped them more powerfully than any instruction could. Consider this technique I used. I created distinct worlds for different units. The Imperial Guard lived, trained, and moved in an environment that constantly reinforced their elite status. Every aspect of their world, from their uniforms to their quarters to how others treated them, told them they were extraordinary. And so, they became extraordinary. Here's another secret. The environment must create its own momentum. When you have shaped the world correctly, excellence perpetuates itself. New members don't need to be constantly instructed. They naturally adapt to the standards that surround them. The environment itself becomes your most tireless instructor. But remember this warning. The environment must be complete. One discordant element, one space where standards slip, one moment where excellence is optional. These create cracks through which mediocrity can seep. The world you create must be total, consistent, and uncompromising. This is what separates mere instruction from true environmental control. Instruction must be constantly repeated. Environmental control works ceaselessly, shaping behavior even when no authority figure is present. When my units maintained perfect discipline, even in my absence, it wasn't because they remembered my orders. It was because they couldn't imagine behaving any other way in the world they inhabited. Here is another vital truth. The environment must reward what you seek to create. When excellence became not just expected, but celebrated in my guard, when precision brought not just approval, but pride, when discipline led not just to effectiveness, but to glory, these qualities became not burdens to bear, but privileges to maintain. Watch how this works. A new recruit enters your carefully crafted world. At first he might resist, might find the standards demanding, might question the precision required, but slowly the environment begins to work upon him. The way others carry themselves, the unspoken expectations, the constant reinforcement of excellence, these shape him more powerfully than any direct instruction could. The deepest secret of environmental control is this: it must become invisible to those within it. When my veterans maintained their legendary standards, they didn't think they were following a system. They were simply being themselves. The environment had shaped them so completely that excellence had become their natural state. Remember this: the strongest prison is the one where the inmates cannot see the walls. The most powerful influence is the one that seems like natural law. When you have created an environment where excellence is the only acceptable option, where intensity is the only possible pace, where greatness is the only imaginable outcome, then you have created something more powerful than any order could ever be. Now let us explore how to take this shaped excellence and give it the ultimate meaning, how to make your people's actions echo beyond their mortal span. Let me tell you about the deepest hunger in the human heart, not for pleasure, not for power, not even for glory, but for immortality. Every human being knows they must die, but they also yearn to live forever. I discovered how to satisfy this hunger, not with false promises of eternal life, but with the genuine opportunity to write their names in history. When I stood before the pyramids with my army, I didn't just see ancient stones. I saw proof that men could outlive their mortal, span through their actions. Soldiers, I said, 40 centuries look down upon you. In that moment, every man understood that his actions today would echo through time, just as those ancient builders still spoke through their work. Here's what most people don't understand about immortality. It's not about living forever. It's about creating something that lives forever. When my guard defended their eagle standards to the death, they weren't just protecting pieces of metal. They were protecting their connection to something eternal, something that would carry their honor through the ages. Let me share with you the first principle of making men immortal. Show them how their present actions connect to both past and future. When my soldiers fought, they weren't just fighting for today's victory. They were adding their names to an eternal roll of honor, becoming part of a story that would be told as long as men celebrated courage. But here is where most leaders fail. They focus only on the immediate, the practical, the measurable. They forget that humans need more than success, they need significance. They need to know that their efforts, their sacrifices, their achievements will outlive their physical existence. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. Every action must be framed not just in terms of its immediate impact, but its eternal significance. When my men built roads across Europe, they weren't just laying stones. They were building pathways that would serve civilization for centuries. This transformed mere labor into lasting legacy. I will tell you something about human nature. We all want to leave our mark. When I created the Legion of Honor, I didn't just create awards, I created a way for men to earn their place in history. Each recipient knew that their name would be remembered, their deeds recorded, their honor preserved beyond their mortal span. Consider this technique I used. Every significant action was documented, every great deed recorded, every sacrifice noted, not just in dry military reports, but in ceremonies, in monuments, in stories that would be told and retold. We weren't just recording events, we were creating legends that would inspire generations. Here's another secret. Immortality must be earned, but it must be achievable. When my soldiers saw their comrades' names carved in stone, saw their deeds celebrated in ceremony, saw their courage become legend, they knew that such immortality was within their reach. This possibility transformed their actions. But remember, this warning, the path to immortality must be authentic. You cannot manufacture artificial significance. The connection between action and eternal impact must be real, must be demonstrable, must be worthy of the ages. False promises of remembrance insult both the present and the future. This is what separates mere motivation from true immortality. Motivation pushes people to act for temporary rewards. The promise of immortality through action pulls people towards their highest possibilities. When my men charged into battle, they weren't just seeking victory, they were seizing their place in history. Here is another vital truth. The immortality you offer must transcend personal glory. When my soldiers knew their actions were building a new Europe, shaping the future of civilization, creating something that would benefit generations yet unborn. Their individual efforts became part of something truly eternal. Watch how this works. A man faces a moment of critical choice. In normal circumstances, he might choose safety, choose comfort, choose the ordinary path. But when he understands that this moment could earn him immortality, that his decision here could echo through centuries, suddenly he becomes capable of extraordinary courage. The deepest secret of immortality through action is this: it must be demonstrated, not just promised. When my veterans saw their fallen comrades' names honored year after year, saw their deeds taught to new recruits, saw their sacrifices remembered and celebrated, they knew that their own actions could achieve the same eternal significance. Remember this: every human being writes their story through their actions. Your task is to show them how to make that story immortal. When people understand that their everyday choices, their moments of courage, their acts of dedication can earn them a kind of immortality, they become capable of greatness that defies time itself. Now let us explore how to take this promise of immortality and forge it into the final unstoppable conviction that victory isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Now we come to the final and most crucial truth of all, one that separates those who merely dream of greatness from those who seize it. Listen carefully, for I am about to tell you the secret that transformed an artillery lieutenant into an emperor, that turned a ragged army into world conquerors, that shaped the fate of nations. Victory is not a matter of chance. It is not a matter of circumstances. Victory is a choice. When I stood before the gates of fate, I didn't wait for destiny to choose me. I chose destiny. When the old world crumbled in revolution, I didn't ask permission to reshape it. I seized the right. This is the ultimate truth that most will never grasp. The world belongs to those who choose to claim it. Here's what most people don't understand about victory. It's not something that happens to you. It's something you decide must happen. When I crossed the Alps in winter, when I marched into Moscow, when I returned from Elba, these weren't gambles. They were decisions. I had already chosen victory. Everything else was just execution. Let me share with you the first principle of choosing victory. It must be absolute. There can be no half measures, no backup plans, no thoughts of acceptable defeat. When I commanded my armies, I didn't hope for victory, I assumed it. This certainty itself became a force that shaped reality. But here is where most people fail. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect conditions, the perfect opportunity. They don't understand that victory isn't found. It's forged. It's not discovered. It's declared. The perfect moment is the one you decide to seize. Watch carefully now, for this is crucial. The choice for victory must be made before the battle begins. When my guard charged at Austerlitz, they weren't trying to win. They were simply claiming what they had already decided was theirs. This is the mindset that moves mountains. I will tell you something about human nature. We rise or fall to the level of our choices. When I promoted a soldier to marshal, I wasn't just giving him rank. I was giving him the opportunity to choose who he would become. And once that choice was made, everything else followed. Consider this final technique I used. Before every major campaign, I would speak of victory not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. Not from blind optimism, but from unshakable choice. France has decided to win, I would say. Not France hopes to win, or France will try to win. The decision itself created the path. Here's the ultimate secret. Victory loves certainty. When you've truly chosen to win, when you've made that choice with every fiber of your being, the universe itself seems to bend to accommodate your decision. I've seen impossible victories become inevitable simply because we had fully committed to making them so. But remember this warning. The choice for victory must be renewed every day, every hour, every moment. It's not a single decision, but a constant stance, a permanent position from which you view the world. When my veterans maintained their standards even in retreat, they were choosing victory even in apparent defeat. This is what separates the truly great from the merely ambitious. The ambitious hope for victory. The great choose it, claim it, assume it as their natural state. When my armies marched across Europe, they didn't march hoping to conquer. They marched as conquerors. The choice had already been made. Here is the final truth. Every moment presents the same fundamental choice. Greatness or mediocrity, victory or defeat, legend or obscurity. These aren't outcomes that happen to you. They're choices you make, stands you take, positions you claim and defend. Watch how this ultimate choice works. A leader steps forward and declares, not with words but with unshakable certainty, that victory is not just possible, but inevitable. This certainty becomes contagious. Others begin to feel it, to embrace it, to embody it. Soon, an entire army moves with the unstoppable momentum of those who have chosen their destiny. The deepest secret of victory is this. It's available to anyone with the courage to choose it completely. When you understand this, truly understand it, you become unstoppable. Not because you're stronger or smarter or better equipped than others, but because you've made a choice they haven't dared to make. Remember this above all. History is written by those who chose to write it. Destiny favors those who choose to shape it. Victory comes to those who have already decided with unshakable certainty that nothing else is acceptable. This is my final command to you. Choose. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, not when victory seems certain. Choose now. Choose with every fiber of your being. Choose with such totality that the universe itself must reorganize around your choice. Victory is waiting. It has always been waiting. It will always be waiting. For those who dare to choose it, now go forth and conquer.